The first thing folks noticed about the mountain man was the way he stood apart from the world, as if the land itself had claimed him long before any human voice ever tried. High above the valleys where wagons creaked and dreams wore thin, he lived among pine and stone with only the wind to speak his name. People said he had come west chasing gold or running from grief, but no one truly knew. What they did know was this: he never spoke of a wife, and when asked, he answered the same way every time, quiet and plain: "I never had a wife." The words carried no bitterness, only a deep stillness, like a frozen creek hiding its current beneath the ice. The frontier was a hard place for gentle souls. The old American West did not reward kindness unless it came wrapped in strength. Men learned early to keep their feelings buried, and women learned how to stand straight even when the ground beneath them shifted. Cabins rose and fell, towns appeared and vanished, and the mountains watched it all with patient eyes. The mountain man had been there longer than most could remember, living off the land, trapping, hunting, and trading just enough to survive. He spoke little, moved slow, and saw more than he let on. His beard was streaked with gray, not from age alone, but from winters that cut deeper than knives. Down in the valley, beyond the reach of his cabin smoke, lived a widow with children who had already learned too much about loss. Her husband had gone west with hope in his pockets and never came back with it. Some said he was taken by sickness, others by the river, and a few whispered darker things best left unsaid. What remained was a woman with tired eyes, a small patch of land, and children who still woke at night calling for a father who would never answer. In the Wild West, grief did not stop the sun from rising, and hunger did not wait for hearts to heal. She did what she could. She mended clothes until her fingers cracked. She planted crops in stubborn soil. She kept a rifle close and her fears closer. The children helped in their own ways, hauling water, setting traps, learning fast because they had no choice. Still, there were nights when the wolves came too close, and days when strangers passed by with looks that lingered too long. A widow alone on the frontier was seen as easy prey by some and an inconvenience by others. She felt eyes on her back even when no one stood behind her. The mountain man noticed changes long before others did. He saw the thin line of smoke from her chimney falter some mornings. He saw tracks near her land that did not belong to deer or elk. He heard sounds carried by the wind, a shout here, a cry there, the kind of noises that made a man sit up straighter and listen harder. He told himself it was none of his concern. He had survived by keeping his distance from other lives, by letting the past stay buried where it lay. Yet the mountains had a way of pushing a man toward truths he could not outrun. He first came down to the valley at dawn when the fog still clung to the grass and the world felt half-made. He did not announce himself, only stood at the edge of the clearing until one of the children spotted him and froze. Fear flashed quick in their eyes, then curiosity. The widow stepped forward, hand tight on the doorframe, her body already braced for trouble. She had seen his kind before, men shaped by solitude, hard to read and harder to trust. He tipped his hat, a simple gesture, and spoke with a voice roughened by cold air and long silences. He said he had extra meat to trade. Nothing more. From that day on, he appeared now and then, never staying long, never asking questions. He fixed a broken fence without being asked. He left a sack of dried food on the porch and was gone before thanks could be given. The children watched him with wide eyes, whispering stories about mountain spirits and wild men who spoke to bears. The widow watched him closer. She noticed how he always stood where he could see the tree line, how his hand never strayed far from his rifle, how his gaze softened only when the children laughed. People in the valley began to talk, as people always do. Some said the lonely mountain man had taken an interest in the widow. Others warned that no good came from men with no past and no family. She heard the talk and said nothing. Words did not keep her children safe at night. Strength did. And strength, she could see, was something the mountain man had in quiet measure. He never crossed a line. He never spoke of staying. When asked why he helped, he shrugged and said the land was kinder when folks looked after one another. Once, one of the children asked him if he had children of his own. He paused long enough for the wind to shift, then answered with that same steady truth: "I never had a wife." The child nodded as if that explained everything. But the frontier had a way of testing fragile balances. One evening, as the sun bled red across the hills, the mountain man caught sight of smoke that was not right. It rose too fast, too dark. He took his rifle and moved without thinking, feet knowing the path better than his mind. By the time he reached the edge of the widow's land, the air was thick with fear. Horses had been spooked, the children were crying, and in the dirt fresh boot prints told a story that made his jaw tighten. He stood there, hidden by shadow, watching the cabin and the woods beyond it. Whatever peace had been built was breaking, and the Old West offered no mercy to those caught unready. The mountain man felt something stir in his chest, something he had locked away years ago when he chose the mountains over men. He did not know yet what choice he would make, or what it would cost him if he did. He only knew that walking away now would leave more than footprints behind. As the last light faded and night claimed the valley, he stepped forward, the sound of a twig snapping beneath his boot sharp in the silence. Somewhere, beyond the trees, something moved. He raised his rifle, breath slow, eyes fixed ahead. The widow held her children close inside the cabin, unaware of how near danger stood, or how close help had come. The mountains leaned in, the wind holding its breath, as the lonely mountain man prepared to face what the dark was sending their way. The snap of the twig carried farther than he meant it to, and the mountain man stilled at once. Night settled heavy over the valley, the kind of dark that swallowed sound and made every breath feel louder than it was. He lowered his foot slowly, feeling the damp earth through worn leather, and listened. Somewhere beyond the trees, a horse snorted, sharp and nervous. Not wild, trained. His eyes followed the edge of the clearing, tracing shapes the way he had learned to do when the mountains were his only neighbors. Inside the cabin, lamplight flickered against the window. The widow's shadow moved across the wall as she gathered the children close. He could not hear her words, but he knew the tone. Calm on the surface, fear held tight beneath it. He had heard it before, long ago, when another cabin stood in another valley, and another woman tried to sound braver than she felt. That memory pressed at him now, unwanted and sharp. He pushed it down and focused on the present. The Old West did not care for memories. It only tested what a man would do next. He circled wider, keeping the trees between himself and the clearing. The boot prints he had seen earlier cut a crooked path toward the creek, then split as if whoever made them could not agree on which way to go. That told him enough. Men passing through, restless and careless, the kind who noticed a lone cabin and thought of easy shelter or easier gain. The frontier was full of such men, drifting like smoke until trouble found them. The mountain man had once been one of them, though no one in the valley would guess it now. He had not always lived above the tree line, speaking more to weather than to people. There had been a time when he walked roads instead of ridges, when his hands were cleaner and his hopes heavier. Back then he believed a man could choose his own ending. The mountains taught him otherwise. They stripped him down, season by season, until only what mattered remained. A low murmur reached him, carried on the breeze. Voices, close enough to hear but too far to catch the words. He eased closer, step by careful step, until the shapes of two men came into view near the creek. They were arguing in hushed tones, their impatience plain in the way they shifted their weight. One pointed toward the cabin. The other shook his head, glancing back toward the trail. Neither looked up toward the trees where the mountain man watched. He did not raise his rifle. Not yet. The frontier had taught him that force, once shown, could not be taken back. Instead he waited, counting breaths, letting the night stretch. He thought of the children's faces when they watched him mend the fence, how their fear had softened into wonder. He thought of the widow's eyes, sharp and tired, measuring him the way the land measured all who tried to claim it. He had never asked her name, and she had never asked his. In the old American West, names could bind as surely as promises. The men by the creek moved again, this time closer to the cabin. The mountain man shifted his stance, angling himself to block the narrow path that led up from the water. If they tried to come that way, they would meet him first? His heart beat steady, a rhythm set by years of solitude and survival. He was not afraid of what might happen. He was afraid of what it would mean if he did nothing. Inside the cabin, the widow pressed her ear to the door. She had heard the horses earlier, the uneasy sounds that set her nerves alight. She told the children to stay low and quiet, her voice gentle despite the tremor she felt. Her mind raced through the choices she had learned to make since being left alone. Hide, speak, run, fight. None of them felt right tonight. She glanced at the rifle by the wall and wondered if she would be steady enough to use it if she had to. She thought of the mountain man then, though she did not know why. Perhaps it was the way he always seemed to appear when the work grew too heavy, or the way the land itself seemed calmer when he was near. She had learned not to expect rescue. The West was full of lessons like that. Still, she found herself listening for a sound beyond the wind, a sign that she was not as alone as she felt. The voices outside grew louder, impatience slipping through their whispers. One of the men laughed, a short sound that carried wrong in the quiet. The mountain man tightened his grip on the rifle, then eased it back again. He stepped forward just enough to let the moon catch the edge of his coat. When he spoke, his voice was low but firm, shaped by cold nights and hard truths. He told them the creek was a poor place to camp, and that the trail back down was easier than it looked. The men froze. One reached for something at his side, then stopped. They had not expected anyone else to be there, least of all a figure rising from the trees like part of the forest itself. The mountain man did not move closer. He did not threaten. He simply stood, blocking the way, the mountains at his back lending him a weight no words could match. For a long moment no one spoke. The wind sighed through the branches, and an owl called somewhere above them. The men exchanged a look, calculating, uneasy. The frontier had a way of revealing who held the ground and who only borrowed it. One muttered something about moving on. The other hesitated, eyes narrowing toward the cabin lights, then spat into the dirt and turned away. They retreated slowly, their horses shifting and stamping as they went. The mountain man watched until the sounds faded and the night settled again. He did not follow. He knew better than to believe trouble left for good the first time it was turned aside. Instead, he remained where he was, listening, waiting, letting the land speak. Inside the cabin, the widow felt the tension ease without knowing why. The horses were quieter now, the voices gone. She did not unlock the door. She held the children until their breathing slowed and the fear loosened its grip. Outside, a shadow passed the window, then moved away. She caught a glimpse of a familiar shape, broad-shouldered and steady, and her chest tightened with something close to relief. The mountain man returned to the trees, taking his old place among them. He looked back once at the cabin, its small light pushing against the dark. He told himself he was only keeping an eye on the valley, the way he always did. Yet, as he turned toward the trail that led back to his high shelter, he knew something had shifted. The land had drawn a line, and he was standing on the wrong side of his old distance. Far off, a branch cracked where no wind blew. He stopped, listening again, aware that whatever had come tonight might not be finished. The mountains remained silent, keeping their counsel, as the lonely mountain man weighed what it meant to protect something beyond himself in a world that rarely forgave such choices. The mountain man did not sleep that night. He returned to his cabin high above the valley, but rest would not come. The wind pushed against the walls, carrying scents of pine and damp earth, yet beneath it all lingered the faint trace of smoke from the widow's chimney. He sat by the door with his rifle across his knees, listening to the land as he always had. The mountains spoke in small ways, a shift of stone, a cry far off, a silence where there should have been sound. Tonight the silence felt watched. At first light he moved again. He followed the ridge that gave him a clear view of the valley below, stepping over frost-touched grass and loose shale. From there he could see the cabin, small and steady against the open ground. Smoke rose straight this morning, a good sign. The children were outside, one chasing the other near the fence he had fixed days earlier. Their laughter reached him faintly, carried upward by the breeze. He told himself that was enough. That knowing they were still safe was reason enough to turn back. But the tracks from the night before tugged at his thoughts. Men like those did not forget a place easily, especially when they believed something had slipped through their fingers. The West was full of grudges left to fester. He scanned the tree line again and noticed something new, a mark near the trail that had not been there before. A broken branch, fresh sap glistening. Someone had passed through after dawn. Down below, the widow sensed the day would not be an easy one. She felt it in the way the children stayed close, their play subdued. She sent them inside with chores and stood alone for a moment, facing the open land. Life on the frontier had taught her to trust such feelings. She had survived too much by ignoring them. Her gaze lifted toward the mountains, searching for a shape she had come to recognize even before she admitted it to herself. She wondered who he was when he was not watching over her land. She knew he trapped and hunted, that he lived alone where most would not dare. Beyond that, he remained a mystery. Sometimes she caught him looking at the children as if seeing something far away, something both precious and painful. Once she had almost asked him why he stayed alone. The words had rested on her tongue, then slipped away. Some questions felt too heavy to ask aloud. In the valley, others had begun to notice his presence more often. A few men at the trading post spoke in low voices about the mountain man who lingered near a widow's land. Some scoffed, others frowned. The Old West did not look kindly on men who crossed invisible lines. Protection could be mistaken for claim, and claims led to trouble. One man, broad and sharp-eyed, listened more than he spoke. He had passed through the valley before and recognized the signs of a place worth revisiting. The mountain man felt eyes on him as he moved along the ridge. He stopped and crouched, blending into the rocks as easily as breathing. Below, the trail cut through a stand of trees, and there he saw it again, movement, not the careless wandering of deer or elk, but measured steps, watching and waiting. He shifted his position, circling downwind, letting instinct guide him where thought might hesitate. The men were there, 2 from the night before and another he did not recognize. They spoke quietly, their heads bent together. One pointed toward the cabin, another toward the mountains. The third stayed silent, gaze sweeping the land with a patience that troubled him. This was no simple passing through. This was planning. He eased back before he could be seen, his mind working through choices he had avoided for years. The mountains had given him peace by keeping him alone. Stepping deeper into the lives below would mean surrendering that peace, perhaps forever. He thought again of the words he always used, "I never had a wife." He had said them so often they felt like truth shaped into stone. Yet truth, he knew, could change when tested. Inside the cabin, the widow prepared for the day with care that went beyond habit. She checked the locks twice. She set aside food where it could be reached quickly. She showed the children how to stay out of sight if someone came. They asked why, and she answered softly that the world was sometimes unkind, but they would face it together. Her voice did not waver, though her hands did. As the sun climbed, a stranger appeared on the trail leading toward her land. He walked openly, hands visible, a smile worn like a practiced thing. She met him at the edge of the clearing, keeping distance between them. He spoke of needing water, of passing through. His eyes wandered too much, taking in the cabin, the fields, the children peering from the doorway. She felt the weight of his attention like a hand at her back. High above, the mountain man saw it all. He watched the stranger's posture, the way his smile never reached his eyes. He noted how the man stood just off-center, leaving room for others to approach unseen, his jaw tightened. This was the shape of trouble he knew too well. He shifted his path, moving closer without revealing himself. The stranger continued to talk, asking questions that sounded harmless but carried sharp edges. How long she had been alone, whether help ever came this way. She answered carefully, offering nothing more than needed. Still, unease coiled tighter in her chest. A sound from the trees made the stranger glance aside. Just a breath of noise, easy to dismiss. He smiled again and tipped his hat, saying he would move on. She watched him go, every step etched into her memory. Only when he disappeared did she allow herself to breathe freely. The mountain man remained hidden, eyes tracking the man until he joined the others farther down the trail. The group paused, speaking in hushed tones. One laughed under his breath. The one with the patient gaze looked up toward the mountains, straight toward where the mountain man lay still. For a moment, their eyes nearly met. The mountain man felt the chill of recognition. This one understood the land. This one would not leave easily. As evening crept in, the valley seemed to hold its breath. The widow barred the door before dark, though no one had returned. The children sensed her fear and stayed close, quiet in ways that spoke louder than words. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying distant sounds that set her heart racing. From his place among the rocks, the mountain man prepared for a long night. He did not know how far the others would go or how soon they would act. He only knew that the line between watching and choosing had thinned to almost nothing. Somewhere below, a family waited, unaware of how close danger stood and how much the lonely mountain man was risking by staying. The mountains watched in silence as the tension tightened, promising that whatever came next would demand more than distance ever had. Night settled over the valley again, thicker than before, as if the land itself knew what was gathering beneath its skin. The widow kept the lamp low, its glow barely touching the walls. The children lay close together, pretending sleep while listening to every sound that slipped through the cracks. Outside, the wind moved slow and uneven, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant horses. She sat at the table with her hands folded, waiting for something she could not yet name. High above, the mountain man moved like a shadow along the ridge. He had spent the day watching, measuring, learning the pattern of those who lingered below. They were careful now, more than before, spreading out, testing paths, speaking only when they thought no one could hear. He knew that kind of care. It meant intent. It meant they were not leaving without something to show for the time they had spent circling the valley. He checked his rifle, then set it aside, choosing a different tool from his pack. Some problems on the frontier could not be solved with force alone. Others demanded it be close at hand, even if unused. He made his way down through a narrow cut in the rock, one that led him behind the trees bordering the widow's land. From there, he could see the cabin and the open ground beyond it. He could also see shapes moving where shadows should have been empty. The men waited for full dark. The mountain man counted 3 at first, then 4. One stayed back near the trail, watching the way out. The others crept closer, keeping low, their movements practiced now. This was no longer chance or hunger. This was a choice they had made together. His jaw set as he felt the weight of his own choice pressing back. Inside the cabin, the widow rose and checked the door once more. The children looked at her with wide eyes, and she knelt, smoothing their hair, whispering that they would be all right. She believed it because she had to. The Old West offered little comfort, but it taught faith in small things, a locked door, a steady breath, the hope that someone, somewhere, was paying attention. A sound brushed the wall outside, light but deliberate. She stiffened, hand moving toward the rifle. Her heart hammered, loud in her ears. Another sound followed, closer this time. The children clutched each other, fear sharp and silent. She held up a hand, asking them to stay still, her eyes never leaving the door. Before anything else could happen, a different sound cut through the night, a firm step. A voice, low and steady, coming from the edge of the clearing. The mountain man stepped into view, not rushing, not hiding, placing himself squarely between the cabin and the trees. The moon caught his outline, broad and unyielding, as if the land had risen up in his shape. The men froze. One hissed under his breath. Another shifted back, startled by the suddenness of him. The one with the patient gaze studied him openly now, a slow smile touching his mouth. Words were exchanged, calm on the surface, edged beneath. The mountain man told them they had wandered far enough. He said the valley was not as empty as it looked. His voice carried the weight of years spent listening more than speaking. The men laughed softly, but it rang hollow. They spoke of passing through, of no harm meant. Their eyes kept drifting toward the cabin, toward the door where a thin line of lamplight still showed. The mountain man did not move aside. He shifted his stance instead, feet firm on the ground, hands relaxed but ready. The frontier respected such signals. So did those who survived it. From inside, the widow watched through a crack in the wall, recognition blooming alongside fear. She knew that shape. She knew the way he stood when danger pressed close. Relief washed over her, followed by a sharper worry. Standing alone against 4 men was not a fair measure of strength. She pressed her forehead to the wood and prayed the land would favor him as it always had. The standoff stretched, each breath heavy with what might come next. The wind dropped, leaving the clearing wrapped in silence. Somewhere, a horse stamped nervously. The mountain man spoke again, this time not to threaten, but to remind. He spoke of how the land remembered every step taken on it. How valleys held grudges longer than men did. how some paths, once crossed, could never be retraced. The one with the patient gaze took a step forward, testing the space between them. The mountain man did not retreat. Instead, he reached down and picked up a stone, turning it in his hand, a small, simple act. It was a reminder. He knew this ground. He knew every rise and fall, every place where a misstep could mean more than a bruise. His calm unsettled them more than shouting ever could. At the edge of the clearing, the man near the trail glanced back, uneasy. He whispered something urgent. The others hesitated, their confidence thinning. Still, none turned away completely. The night pressed closer, thick with tension, as if waiting for the first crack to split it open. Inside the cabin, the children clung to their mother, eyes fixed on the door. She felt their trembling and drew strength from it. Whatever happened next, she would not hide from it. She straightened, lifting the rifle, not to threaten but to be ready. The frontier had taught her that survival often meant standing when every part of you wanted to fold. The mountain man sensed movement behind him, a shift in the trees he had not heard before. He turned his head just enough to see it. Another shape, smaller, slipping closer to the cabin from the far side. His chest tightened. They were trying to divide his attention, to pull him away from the door. Clever, dangerous. He raised his voice then, sharper now, calling out what he saw, letting the men know he was not blind to their plan. The shape froze, the others cursed under their breath. The moment stretched thin, ready to tear. Somewhere deep inside him, a door he had kept closed for years swung open. He felt the old fear, the old resolve, the memory of why he had chosen the mountains in the first place. The widow heard his warning and understood. She moved the children farther back, her own fear turning into a steady heat. She did not know how this would end, only that it could not go on like this. Outside, the men argued in low voices, frustration breaking through their careful calm. The one with the patient gaze looked from the mountain man to the cabin, measuring the cost. The moon slid behind a cloud, plunging the clearing into deeper shadow. In that darkness, every sound grew louder, every movement more dangerous. The mountain man planted his feet and waited, knowing the next few moments would decide more than one fate. The valley held its breath, the land leaning close, as all of them stood on the edge of something that could not be undone. The darkness did not last long. The cloud drifted past the moon, and pale light returned to the clearing, revealing faces drawn tight by indecision. The men shifted again, their earlier confidence worn thin. The mountain man remained still, his presence steady as the ground beneath him. He did not raise his voice or step forward. He simply waited, trusting the land and the truth he stood on. The one with the patient gaze spoke at last, his tone measured but strained. He said there was no prophet worth this kind of trouble. He glanced toward the cabin, then toward the mountains, as if weighing which watched him closer. The frontier had a way of choosing sides even when men tried not to. After a long pause, he nodded once to the others. The decision settled among them like dust after a storm. They backed away, slow and wary, never turning their backs fully. One muttered a curse, another kicked at the dirt in frustration. Horses were gathered, reins pulled tight. Before mounting, the patient one looked again at the mountain man, something like respect flickering across his face. Then they were gone, swallowed by the trees and the winding trail beyond. The silence that followed felt unreal, fragile as thin ice. The mountain man stayed where he was, listening until the last sound faded. Only then did he lower his shoulders and breathe out. The night air felt cooler now, cleaner. He turned toward the cabin and saw the door open slowly. The widow stepped out, the lamp held high enough to light her face. Relief washed over her features, followed by gratitude so deep it made her eyes shine. She did not rush toward him. Instead, she stood there, letting the moment settle, letting herself believe the danger had truly passed. The children peeked from behind her, curiosity pushing past fear. One of them lifted a hand in a small wave. The mountain man felt his chest tighten, a warmth spreading where cold had lived too long. He tipped his hat, a simple gesture, and took a step closer. Up close, she could see the lines time and weather had carved into his face, and something gentler beneath them. She thanked him, the words plain but full. He shrugged, as if what he had done required no thanks. He said the valley deserved peace. He said no one should have to face the night alone. The children edged closer, emboldened now. One asked if the bad men were gone for good. The mountain man knelt, meeting the child's eyes, and said some troubles returned if given reason, but many faded when faced with firm ground. He told them the land remembered courage as much as fear. The child nodded, satisfied, and smiled. In the days that followed, the valley changed in small but lasting ways. Word spread that the widow's land was no longer unguarded. Travelers passed with more care. Those who lingered found reasons to move on. The mountain man did not return to his high cabin right away. Instead, he stayed closer, helping with repairs, showing the children how to read tracks and weather signs, teaching without preaching. The widow watched him as he worked, noticing how easily he fit into the rhythm of daily life, as if he had always belonged there. She learned pieces of his past through quiet moments rather than questions. She learned he had once lost something precious and chosen solitude to survive it. She learned he trusted actions more than promises. In return, he learned the sound of laughter at dawn, the comfort of shared meals, the strength found in simple company. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they sat outside the cabin, watching the sky change color. The children played nearby, their voices bright. The widow spoke then, not with urgency, but with openness. She asked him if he planned to return to the mountains. He considered the question longer than he expected to. The peaks still called to him, but their voice had softened. He answered honestly. He said the mountains would always be part of him, but the valley had begun to matter too. He said he had spent years believing he was meant to stand apart. He paused, then added that sometimes the land showed a man a different path when he least expected it. She smiled, not pushing, not asking for more. The Old West taught patience as much as endurance. That night, when he left, he did not go far. His fire burned lower on the ridge, close enough that its glow could be seen from the cabin if one knew where to look. Seasons turned. The children grew stronger, more confident. The widow's land flourished under careful hands and shared effort. The mountain man became a familiar figure in the valley, still quiet, still watchful, but no longer alone. He taught others what he knew, and in doing so, found his own burdens lighter. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, the widow asked him about the words he always used. She asked why he said he never had a wife. He set his tools down and looked out over the fields. When he spoke, his voice was steady but open. He said there had been a time when he thought that meant something was missing. Now, he understood it meant his life had simply taken a longer road. She did not answer right away. She reached for his hand instead, her grip warm and sure. He felt the truth of it settle deep, reshaping old beliefs. The frontier had taught him survival, but it was this quiet connection that taught him belonging. Years later, travelers passing through the valley spoke of a place where hardship met kindness, where a lonely mountain man had chosen to stand with a widow and her children instead of the distance he once believed kept him safe. They spoke of a land that remembered courage and rewarded those who protected it. The mountains still watched, patient as ever, but now they watched a home built not of stone and pine alone, but of trust, shared strength, and a love that grew without needing to be named.